Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. This is episode 4 of the fourth book in the Technological Dictatorship series, H.G. Wells's The New World Order. We pick up where we left off last week at chapter 9, Politics for the Sane Man. So, here we go. Let us restate the general conclusions to which our preceding argument has brought us. The establishment of a progressive world socialism in which the freedoms, health, and happiness of every individual are protected by a universal law based on a redeclaration of the rights of man, and wherein there is the utmost liberty of thought, criticism, and suggestion, is the plain rational objective before us now. Only the most effective realization of this objective can establish peace on earth and arrest the present march of human affairs to misery and destruction. We cannot reiterate this objective too clearly and too frequently. The triangle of collectivization, law, and knowledge should embody the common purpose of all mankind. Between us and that goal intervenes the vast and deepening disorders of our time. The new order cannot be brought into existence without a gigantic and more or less coordinated effort of the saner and abler elements in the human population. The thing cannot be done rapidly and melodramatically. That effort must supply the frame for all sane social and political activities and practical criteria for all religious and educational associations. But since our world is multitudinously varied and confused, it is impossible to narrow down this new revolutionary movement to any single class, organization, or party. It is too great a thing for that. It will, in its expansion, produce and perhaps discard a number of organizations and parties, converging upon its ultimate objective. Consequently, in order to review the social and political activities of sane, clear-headed people today, we have to deal with them piecemeal from a number of points of view. We have to consider an advance upon a long and various front. Let us begin then with the problem of sanity in the face of political methods of our time. What are we to do as voting citizens? There, I think the history of so-called democracies in the past half century is fairly conclusive. Our present electoral methods, which give no choice but a bilateral choice to the citizen and so force a two-party system upon him, is a mere caricature of a representative government. It is produced upon both sides of the Atlantic big, stupid, and corrupt party machines. That was bound to happen, and yet this day there is a sort of shyness in the minds of young men interested in politics when it comes to discussing proportional representation. They think it a bit fatty. At best, it is a side issue. Party politicians strive to maintain that bashfulness because they know quite well that what is called proportional representation, with the single transfer vote in large constituencies returning a dozen members or more, is extinction for the mere party hack and destruction for party organizations. The machine system in the United States is more elaborate, more deeply entrenched legally in the Constitution and illegally in the spoils systems, and it may prove more difficult to modernize in the British, which is based on an outworn caste tradition. But both Parliament and Congress are essentially similar in their fundamental quality. They trade in titles, concessions, and the public welfare. They are only amenable in the rough and at long last to the political movements of public opinion. It is an open question whether they are much more responsive to popular feeling than the dictators we denounce so unreservedly as the antithesis of democracy. They betray a great disregard of mass responses. They explain less. They disregard more. The dictators have to go on talking and talking, not always truthfully, but they have to talk. A dumb dictator is inconceivable. In such times of extensive stress and crisis as the present, the baffling slowness, inefficiency, and wastefulness of the party system become so manifest that some of its worst pretenses are put aside. The party game is suspended. His Majesty's opposition abandons the pose of safeguarding the interests of the common citizen from these scoundrels upon the government benches. Republicans and Democrats begin to cross the party line to discuss the new situation. Even the men who live professionally by the parliamentary congressional imposture abandon it if they are sufficiently frightened by the posture on affairs. The appearance of an all-party national government in Britain before very long seems inevitable. Great Britain has an effect on socialists in a couple of months. She is also suspending party politics, just as the United States did in the Great Slump. And in both cases, this happened because the rottenness and inefficiency of party politics stank to heaven in the face of danger. And since in both cases, party government threw up its hands and bolted. Is there any conceivable reason why we should let it come back at any appearance of victory or recovery? Why we should not go ahead from where we are to a less impromptu socialist regime under a permanent non-party administration to the reality, if not to the form, of a permanent socialist government? Now, here I have nothing to suggest about America. I have never, for example, tried to work out the consequences of the absence of executive ministers from the legislature. I am inclined to think that this is one of the weak points in the Constitution, that the English usage, which exposes the minister to question time in the House and makes him a prime mover in legislation affecting his department, is a less complicated and therefore more democratic arrangement than the American one. And the powers and functions of the president and the Senate are so different from the consolidated powers of cabinet and prime minister that even when an Englishman has industriously mugged up the constitutional points, he is still almost as much at a loss to get the living reality as he would be if he were shown the score of an opera before hearing it played, or the blueprints of a machine he had never seen in action. Very few Europeans understand the history of Woodrow Wilson, the Senate, and his League of Nations. They think that America, which they imagine as a large single individual, planted the latter institution upon Europe and then deliberately shuffled off her responsibility for it, and they will never think otherwise. And they think that America kept out of the war to the very limit of decency, overcharged us for munitions and contributed to the common victory, and made a grievance because the consequent debt was not discharged. They talk while America talks as if no Englishmen were killed between 1914 and 1918. We had 800,000 dead. Until the noble American conscripts came forward to die for them to the tune of about 50,000. Savor, for example, even this title of Quincy Howe's English excerpts, Every American to Do His Duty. It's the meanest of titles, but many Americans seem to like it. On my desk, as I write, is a pamphlet by Mr. Robert Randall, nicely cyclostyled and got up, which urges a common attack on the United States as a solution to the problem of Europe. No countries will ever feel united unless they have a common enemy. And the natural common enemy for Europe, it is declared as the United States. So to bring about the United States of Europe, we are beginning by denouncing the Monroe Doctrine. I believe in the honesty and good intentions of Mr. Robert Randall. He is, I am sure, no more than in the pay of Germany, direct or indirect, than Mr. Quincy Howe or Mr. Harry Elmer Barnes. But could the most brilliant of Nazi war propagandists devise a more effective and estranging suggestion? But I wonder from my topic, I do not know how sane men in America are going to set about relaxing the stranglehold of the Constitution, get control of their own country out of the hands of those lumpish, solemnly cunning politicians with their great, strong jowls developed by chewing gum and Autran shrieking, whose photographs add a real element of frightfulness to the pages of time. How are they going to abolish the spoils system, discover and educate to expand a competent civil service able to redeem the hampered promises of the New Deal and pull America into line with the reconstruction of the rest of the world? But I perceive that in politics and indeed in most things, the underlying humor and sanity of Americans are apt to find a way around and do the impossible. And as I have little doubt they will manage it somehow, as I have when I see a street performer on his little chair and carpet, all tied up with chains, waiting until there are sufficient pennies in the hat to justify exertion. The differences in method, pace, and tradition are a great misfortune to the whole English-speaking world. We English people do not respect the Americans enough. We are too disposed to think that they are all Quincy Howes and Harry Elmer Barneses and Boras and such like, conceited and suspicious anti-British monomaniacs who must be humored at any cost, which is why we are never so frank and rude with them as they deserve. But the more we must contain ourselves, the less we love them. Real brothers can curse each other and keep friends. Someday Britannia will give Columbia a piece of her mind, and that may clear the air, said an exasperated Englishman to me a day or so ago. I pray to God they keep out of this war anyhow. We shall never hear the last of it if they don't. Yet a different pace our two people are traveling towards identical ends, and it is lamentable that a difference of accent and idiom should do more mischief than a difference of language. So far as Great Britain goes, things are nearer and closer to me. And it seems to me that there is an excellent opportunity now to catch the country in a state of socialization and suspend party politics and keep it at that. It is a logical but often disregarded corollary of the virtual creation of all-party national governments and suspension of electoral contests that since there is no opposition, party criticism should give place to individual criticism of ministers, and instead of throwing out governments, we should set ourselves to throw out individual administrative failures. We need no longer to confine our choice of public servants to political careerists. We can insist upon men who have done things and can do things, and whenever an election occurs, we can organize a block of non-party voters who will vote, it is possible, for an outsider of proved ability and will at any rate insist on a clear statement from every parliamentary candidate of the concrete service, if any, he has done the country, of his past and present financial entanglements in his family relationships, and of any title he possesses. We can get these necessary particulars published and note what newspapers decline to do so. And if there are still only politicians to vote for, we can at least vote and spoil our voting cards by way of protest. At present, we see one public service after another in a mess through the incompetent handling of some party hack and the unseen activities of interested parties. People are asking already why Sir Arthur Salter is not in control of Allied shipping again. Sir John Orr directing our food supply with perhaps Sir Frederick Keble to help him. Sir Robert Vansittart in the Foreign Office. We want to know the individuals responsible for the incapacity of our intelligence and propaganda ministries, so that we may induce them to quit public life. It would be quite easy now to excite a number of anxious people with a cry for competence, not party. Most people in the British Isles are heartily sick of Mr. Chamberlain and his government, but they cannot face up to the political split in wartime. And Mr. Chamberlain sticks to office with all the pertinacity of a barnacle. But if we do not attack the government as a whole, but individual ministers, and if we replace them one by one, we shall presently have a government so rejuvenated that even Mr. Chamberlain will realize and accept his superannuation. Quite a small body of public-spirited people could organize an active, vigilant society to keep these ideas before the mass of voters and begin the elimination of inferior elements from our public life. This would be a practical job of primary importance in our political regeneration. It would lead directly to a new and more efficient political structure to carry on after the present war has collapsed or otherwise ended. Following upon this campaign for the conclusive internment of the played-out party system, there comes the necessity for a much more strenuous search for administrative and technical ability throughout the country. We do not want to miss a single youngster who can be of use in the great business of making over Great Britain, which has been so rudely, clumsily, and wastefully socialized by our war perturbations, so that it may become a permanently efficient system. And from the base of the educational pyramid up to its apex of higher education of teachers, heads of departments, and research, there is need for seeking for such a quickening of minds and methods as only a more or less organized movement of sanely critical men can bring about. We want ministers now, the highest quality in every department, but in no department of public life is a man of creative understanding, bold initiative, and administrative power so necessary as in the education ministry. So tranquil and unobtrusive has been the flow of educational affairs in the British Empire that it seems almost scandalous, and it is certainly vulgar to suggest that we need an educational ginger group to discover and support such a minister. We want a minister of education who can shock teachers into self-examination, electrify and rejuvenate old dons, or put them away in ivory towers, and stimulate the younger ones. Under the party system, the education ministry has always been a restful corner for some deserving party politician, with an abject respect for his alma mater and the permanent officials. During wartime, when other departments wake up, the education department sinks into deeper lethargy. One cannot recall a single British education minister, since there have been such things in our island story as ministers for education, who signified anything at all educationally or did anything of his own impulse that was in the least worthwhile. Suppose we found a live one soon and let him rip. There again is something to be done, far more revolutionary than throwing bombs at innocent policemen or assassinating harmless potentates or ex-potentates. And yet it is only asking that an existing department be what it pretends to be. A third direction in which any gathering accumulation of sanity should direct its attention is the clumsy unfairness and indirectness of our present methods of expropriating the former well-to-do classes. The only observable principle seems to be widows and children first. Socialization is being effected in Britain and America alike not by frank expropriation, with or without compensation, but by increasing government control and increasing taxation. Both our government communities are going into socialism backward and without ever looking round. This is good insofar as that technical experience and directive ability is changed over step by step from entirely private employment to public service. And on that side, sane and helpful citizens have little to do beyond making the process conscious of itself and the public aware of the real nature of the change. But it is bad in its indiscriminate destruction of savings, which are the most exposed and vulnerable side of the old system. They are expropriated by a profit controlled and taxation alike, and at the same time they suffer in purchasing power by the acceleration of that process of monetary inflation, which is the unavoidable readjustment, the petition and bankruptcy of a community that is overspent. The shareholding class dwindles and dies. Widows and orphans, the old who are past work and infirm who are incapable of it, are exposed in their declining years to a painful shrinkage of their modes of living. There is no doubt a diminution of social waste, but also there is an indirect impoverishment of free opinion and free scientific and artistic initiative, as the endless societies, institutions, and services which have enriched life for us have been very largely supported by voluntary subscriptions shrivel. At present, a large proportion of our scientific, artistic, literary, and social workers are educated out of the private savings fund. In a class war revolution, these economically very defenseless but socially very convenient people are subjugated to vindictive humiliation. It is viewed as a great triumph for their meaner neighbors, but a revolution sanely conducted will probably devise a system of tenable and terminable annuities in compensation and of assistance to one's voluntary associations, which will ease off the social dislocations due to the disappearance of one stratum of relatively free and independent people before its successors. That is to say, the growing class of retired officials, public administrators, and so forth, find their feet and develop their own methods of assertion and enterprise. Chapter 10, Declaration of the Rights of Man. Let us now turn to another system of problems in the collectivization of the world, and that is the preservation of liberty in the socialist state and the restoration of that confidence without which good behavior is generally impossible. This destruction of confidence is one of the less clearly recognized evils of the present phase of world disintegration. In the past, there have been periods when whole communities, or at least large classes within communities, have gone about their business with a general honesty, directness, and sense of personal honor. They have taken a keen pride in the quality of their output. They have lived through life on tolerable and tolerant terms with their neighbors. The laws they observed have varied in different countries and periods, but their general nature was to make an orderly, law-abiding life possible and natural. They had been taught, and they believed, and they had every reason to believe, this, that, or the other thing is right. Do right and nothing, except by some strange exceptional misfortune can touch you. The law guarantees you that. Do right and nothing will rob you or frustrate you. Nowhere in the world now is there very much of that feeling left. And as it disappears, the behavior of people disintegrates towards a panic scramble towards cheating, overreaching, gang organization, precautionary hoarding, concealment, and all the meanness and antisocial feeling which is the natural outcome of insecurity. Faced with what now amounts to something like a moral stampede, more and more sane men will realize the urgency for our restoration of confidence. The more socialization proceeds and the more directive authority is concentrated, the more necessary is an efficient protection of individuals from the impatience of a well-meaning or narrow-minded or ruthless officials, and indeed from all these possible abuses of advantage that are inevitable under such circumstances to our still childishly wicked breed. In the past, the Atlantic world has been particularly successful in expedients for meeting this aspect of human nature. Our characteristic and traditional method may be called the method of the fundamental declaration. Our Western peoples, by happy instinct, have produced statements of right from Magna Carta onwards to provide a structural defense between the citizen and the necessary growth of central authority. And plainly, the successful organization of the more universal and penetrating collectivism that is now being forced upon us all will be frustrated in its most vital aspect unless it is organized. Its organization is accomplished by the preservative of a new declaration of the rights of man that must, because of the increasing complexity of the social structure, be more generous, detailed, and explicit than any of its predecessors. Such a declaration must become the common fundamental law of all communities and collectivities assembled under the World Pacts. It should be interwoven with the declared war aims of the combatant powers now. It should become the primary fact in any settlement. It should be put before the now combatant states for their approval, their embarrassed silence, or their rejection. In order to be as clear as possible about this, let me submit a draft for your consideration of this proposed Declaration of the Rights of Man, using man, of course, to cover every individual, male or female, of the species. I have endeavored to bring in everything that is essential and to omit whatever secondary issues can be easily deduced from its general statements. It is a draft for your consideration. Points may have been overlooked, and it may contain repetitions and superfluous statements. Since a man comes into this world through no fault of his own, since he is manifestly a joint inheritor of the accumulations of the past, and since these accumulations are more than sufficient to justify the claims that are here made for him, it follows: 1. That every man without distinction of race or color or of professed belief or opinions is entitled to the nourishment, covering medical care and attention needed to realize his full possibilities of physical and mental development and to keep him in a state of health from his birth to death. 2. That he is entitled to sufficient education to make him a useful and interested citizen. That special education should be so made available as to give him equality of opportunity for the development of his distinctive gifts in the service of mankind. That he should have early, easy access to information upon all matters of common knowledge throughout his life and enjoy the utmost freedom of discussion, association, and worship. 3. That he may engage freely in any lawful occupation, earning such pay as the need for his work and the increment it makes to the common welfare may justify. That he is entitled to paid employment and to a free choice wherever there is any variety of employment open to him. He may suggest employment for himself and have his claim publicly considered, accepted, or dismissed. 4. That he shall have the right to buy or sell without any discriminatory restrictions anything which may be lawfully bought or sold in such quantities and with such reservations as are compatible with common welfare. Here, I will interpolate a comment. We have to bear in mind that in a collective estate, buying and selling to secure income and profit will be not simply needless but impossible. The stock exchange, after its career of 400-odd years, will necessarily vanish with the disappearance of any rational motive, either for large accumulations or for hoarding against deprivation and destitution. Long before the age of complete collectivization arises, the savings of individuals for later consumption will probably be protected by some development of the unit trust system into a public service. They will probably be entitled to interest at such a rate as to compensate for that secular inflation which should go on in a steady and rich world community. Inheritance and bequests in a community in which the means of production and of all possible monopolization are collectivized can concern little else than relatively small, beautiful, and inanimate objects which will afford pleasure but no unfair social advantage to the receiver. 5. That he and his personal property, lawfully acquired, are entitled to police and legal protection from private violence, deprivation, compulsion, and intimidation. 6. That he may move freely about the world at his own expense, that is, his private house or apartment, or reasonably limited garden enclosure as his castle, which may be entered only with consent, but that he shall have the right to come and go over any kind of country, moorland, mountain, farm, great garden, or whatnot, or upon the seas, lakes, and rivers of the world, where his presence will not be destructive of some special use, dangerous to himself, nor seriously inconvenient to his fellow citizens. 7. That a man, unless he is declared by a competent authority to be in danger to himself, and to others through mental abnormality, a declaration which must be annually confirmed, shall not be imprisoned for a longer period than 6 days without being charged with a definite offense against the law, nor for more than 3 months without public trial. At the end, if the latter period, if he has not been tried and sentenced by due process of law, he shall be released, nor shall he be conscripted for military, police, or any other service to which he has a conscientious objection. That although a man is subject to the free criticism of his fellows, he shall have adequate protection from any lying or misrepresentation that may distress or injure him. All administrative registration and records about a man shall be open to his personal and private inspection. There shall be no secret dossiers in any administrative department. All dossiers shall be accessible to the man concerned and subject to verification and correction at his challenge. A dossier is merely a memorandum. It cannot be used as evidence without proper confirmation in an open court. 9. That no man shall be subjected to any sort of mutilation or sterilization except with his own deliberate consent, freely given, nor to bodily assault except in restraint of his own violence, nor to torture, beating, or any other bodily punishment. He shall not be subjected to imprisonment with such an excess of silence, noise, light, or darkness as to cause mental suffering, or to imprisonment in infected, verminous, or otherwise insanitary quarters, or to be put into the company of verminous or infected people. He shall not be forcibly fed, nor prevented from starving himself if he so desire. He shall not be forced to take drugs, nor shall they be administered to him without his knowledge and consent. That the extreme punishments to which he may be subjected are rigorous imprisonment for a term of no longer than 15 years or death. Here I should point out that there is nothing in this to prevent any country from abolishing the death penalty, any country from, nor do I assert a general right to commit suicide, because no one can punish a man for doing that. He has escaped. But threats and incompetent attempts to commit suicide belong to an entirely different category. They are indecent and distressing acts that can easily become a serious social nuisance from which the normal citizen is entitled to protection. 10. The provisions and principles embodied in this declaration shall be more fully defined in the Code of Fundamental Human Rights, which shall be made easily accessible everywhere. This declaration shall not be qualified nor departed from upon any pretext whatever. It incorporates all previous declarations of human right. Henceforth, for a new year, it is the fundamental law for mankind throughout the whole world. No treaty and no law affecting these primary rights shall be binding upon any man or province or administrative division of the community that has not been made openly by and with the active or tacit acquiescence of every adult citizen concerned, and either given by a direct majority vote of his publicly elected representatives. In matters of collective behavior, it is by the majority decision men must abide. No administration, under pretext of urgency, convenience, or the like, shall be entrusted with powers to create or further define offenses or set up bylaws which will in any way infringe the rights and liberties here asserted. All legislation must be public and definite. No such secret treaty shall be binding on individuals, organizations, or communities. No orders in council or the like which extend the application of law shall be permitted. There is no source of law but the people, and since life flows on constantly to new citizens, no generation of people can in whole or in part surrender or delegate the legislative power inherent in mankind. Here I think it is something that keener minds than mine may polish into a working declaration, which would in the most effective manner begin that restoration of confidence of which the world stands in need. Much of it might be better phrased, and I think it embodies a general goodwill in mankind from pole to pole. It is certainly what we all want for ourselves. It could be a very potent instrument indeed in the present phase of human affairs. It is necessary and it is acceptable. Incorporate that in your peace treaties and articles of federation, I would say, and you will have a firm foundation which will continually grow firmer for fearless cosmopolitan life of a new world order. You will never get that order without some such document. It is the missing key to endless contemporary difficulties. And if we, the virtuous democracies, are not fighting for these common human rights, then what in the name of the noble Nobility, gentry, the crown, and the established church, the city, the times, in the army, and the Navy Club are we common British peoples fighting for. 11. International politics. Saner element in human society may reasonably work for and hope for, having cleared away the horrible nightmares of the class war and the totalitarian slave state from our imaginations, we're able to attack the immediate riddles of international conflict and relationship with some hope of general resolution. If we realize to the depths of our being that a world settlement based in the three ideas of socialism, law, and knowledge is not only possible and desirable, but the only way of escape from deepening disaster, then manifestly our attitude towards the resentments of Germany, the prejudices of America or Russia, the poverty and undernourishment of India, or the ambitions of Japan must be frankly opportunistic. None of these are primary issues. We sane men must never lose sight of our ultimate objective. But our methods of getting there will have to vary with the fluctuating variations of national feeling and national policy. There is the idea of federalism, upon which I have already submitted a criticism in the 7th chapter. As I have shown here, they strike proposals will either take you further or land you nowhere. Let us assume that we can strengthen this proposal to the extent of making a socialistic economic consortium and adhesion to the Declaration of Rights primary conditions for any federal union. Then it becomes a matter of mood and occasion with what communities the Federal Association may begin. We can even encourage feeble federal experiments which do not venture even so far as that along the path to sanity, in the certainty that either they will fade out again or else that they will become liberal realities of the type to which the whole world must ultimately conform. Behind any such half-hearted tentativeness, an educational propaganda can be active and effective. But when it comes to the rate and amount of participation in the construction of a rational world order, we can expect from any country or group of countries we are in a field where there is a little more than guessing and haphazard generalizations about national character to work upon. We are dealing with masses of people which may be swayed enormously by a brilliant newspaper or an outstandingly persuasive or compelling personality, or by almost accidental changes in the drift of events. I, for example, cannot tell how far the generality of educated, incapable people in the British Empire now may fall in with our idea of accepting and serving a collectivism, or how strong their conservative resistance may be. It is my own country, and I ought to know it best, and I do not know it detachedly enough or deeply enough to decide that. I do not see how anyone can foretell these swirls and eddies of response. The advocacy of such movements of the mind and will, as I am speaking of here, is in itself among the operating causes in political adjustment, and those who are deepest in the struggle are least able to estimate how it is going. Every factor in political and international affairs is a fluctuating factor. The wise man, therefore, will not set his heart upon any particular drift or combination. He will favor everything that trends toward the end at which he aims. The present writer cherishes the idea that the realization of a common purpose and a common cultural inheritance may spread throughout all the English-speaking communities, and there can be no harm in efforts to give this concrete expression. He believes the disassociation of the British Empire may inaugurate this great synthesis. At the same time, there are factors making for some closer association of the United States of America with what are called the Oslo powers. There is no reason why one of these associations should stand in the way of the other. Some countries, such as Canada, rest already under what is particularly a double guarantee. She has the security of the Monroe Doctrine and the protection of the British fleet. A Germany of 80 million people, which has been brought to acquiescence in the Declaration of the Rights of Man, and which is already highly collectivized, may come much earlier to the completely liberal socialist regime than Great Britain or France. If she participates in a consortium for the development of what are called the politically backward regions of the world, she may no longer be disposed of for military adventures and further stress and misery. She may enter upon a phase of social and economic recovery so rapid as to stimulate and react upon every other country in the world. It is not for other countries to dictate her initial politics, and if the German people want to remain united as one people in federated states or in a centralized state, there is neither righteousness or wisdom preventing them. The Germans, like the rest of the world, have to get on with collectivization. They have to produce their pattern, and they cannot give themselves to that if they are artificially divided by disorganized by some old-fashioned Quai d'Orsay scheme. They must do the right thing in their own way. The belligerent tradition may linger on in Germany for a generation or so as a risk the Atlantic powers have to take. The world has a right to insist that not simply some German government, but the German people generally recognize unequivocally and repeatedly the rights of man asserted in the Declaration, and it is disarmed, and that any aggressive plant, any warplane, warship, gun, or arsenal that is discovered in the country shall be destroyed forthwith, brutally, and completely. But that is a thing that should not be confined to Germany. Germany should not be singled out for that. Armament should be illegally everywhere, and some sort of international force should patrol a treaty-bound world. Partial armament is one of those absurdities, dear to moderate-minded, reasonable men. Armament itself is making war. Making a gun, pointing a gun, and firing it are all acts of the same order. It should be illegal to construct anywhere upon earth any mechanism for the specific purpose of killing men. When you see a gun, it is reasonable to ask, whom is that intended to kill? Germany's armament after 1918 was largely tolerated because she played off British Russophobia against the Russian fear of capitalist attack. But that excuse can no longer serve any further furtive warmongers among her people after her pact with Moscow. Released from the economic burdens and restrictions that crippled her economy after 1918, Germany may find a full and satisfying outlet for the energy of her young men in her systematic collectivization, raising the standard of her common life deliberately and steadily, giving Russia a lead in efficiency and obliging the maundering politics and discursive inattention of the Atlantic world to remain concentrated upon the realities of life. The idea of again splitting up Germany into discordant fragments so as to postpone her ultimate recovery indefinitely is a pseudo-democratic slacker's dream. It is a diametrically opposed to world reconstruction. We have need of the particular qualities of her people, and the sooner she recovers, the better for the whole world. It is preposterous to resume the policy of holding back Germany simply that the old order may enjoy a few more years of self-indulgence than England, France, and America. Okay. A lingering fear of German military aggression may not be altogether bad for the minor states of southeastern Europe and Asia Minor by breaking down their excessive nationalism and inducing them to work together. The policy of the same man should be to welcome every possible experiment in international understanding, duplicate and overlap one another. So much the better. He has to watch the actions of his own foreign office with incessant jealousy for signs of that Machiavellian spirit which foments division among foreign governments and peoples and schemes perpetually to frustrate the progressive movement in human affairs by converting it into a swaying, indecisive balance of power. This book is a discussion of the guiding principles and not of the endless specific problems of adjustment that arise on the way to a world realization of collective unity. I merely glance at that old idea of Napoleon III, the Latin Union, and the possibility of a situation in Spain and the Portuguese South America parallel to the overlap of the Monroe Doctrine and the European motherlands, which already exists in practice in the rise of Canada, nor will I expiate upon the manifold possibilities of sincere application of the Declaration of the Rights of Man to India and Africa, and particularly to those parts of the world in which more or less Black peoples are awakened to the realities of racial discrimination and oppression. I will utter a passing warning against any Machiavellian treatment of the problem of Northern and Eastern Asia, into which the British may be led by their constitutional Russophobia. Soviet collectivism, especially if presently it becomes liberalized and more efficient through a recovery from its present obsession by Stalin, may spread very effectively across Central Asia and China to anyone nourished mentally upon the ideas of an unending competition of powers for ascendancy forever and ever in alliance with Japan, as truculent and militarized a Japan as possible, will seem the most natural response in the world. But to anyone who has grasped the reality of the present situation of mankind and the urgent desirableness of world collectivization, this immense unification will become something to welcome, criticize, and assist. The old bugbear of Russia's designs upon India may also play its part in distorting the Asiatic situation for many people. Yet 100 years of mingled neglect, exploitation, and occasional outbreaks of genuine helpfulness should have taught the British that the ultimate fate of India's hundreds of millions rests now upon no conquering ruler, but wholly and solely upon the ability of the Indian people to cooperate in world collectivization. They may learn much by way of precept and example from Russia and from the English-speaking world, but the days for mere revolt or relief by a change of masters have passed. India has to work out for itself with its own manner of participation in the struggle for a world order, starting from the British Raj as a datum line. No outside power can work that out for the Indian peoples, nor force them to do it if they have no will for it. But I will not wander further among these ever-changing problems and possibilities. They are, so to speak, wayside eventualities and opportunities. Immense though some of them are, they remain secondary. Every year or so now, the shifting channels of politics need to be recharted. The activities and responses of the sane men in any particular country and at any particular time will be determined always by the overruling conception of a secular movement towards a single world order. That will be the underlying permanent objective of all his political life. There is, however, another line of world consolidation to which attention must be drawn before we conclude this section, and is what we may call ad hoc internationalism. It is admirably set forth in Leonard Woolf's International Government, a classic which was published in 1916 and still makes profitable reading. The typical ad hoc organization is the Postal Union, which David Lubin, that brilliant, neglected thinker, would have had extended until its controlled shipping and equalized freights throughout the world. He based his ideas upon his practical experience of the mail order business from which he derived his very considerable fortune. From that problem of freight adjustment, he passed to the idea of a controlled survey of worlds so that a shortage here or a glut there could be foreseen and remedied in time. He realized that the idea in the form of the International Institute of Agriculture at Rome, which in its heyday made treaties like an independent sovereign power for the supply of returns from nearly every government upon earth. The War of 1914 and Lubin's death in 1919 checked the development of this admirable and most inspiring experiment in ad hoc internationalism. Its history is surely something that should be made part of the compulsory education of every statesman and publicist. Yet never in my life have I met a professional politician who knew anything whatever or wanted to know anything about it. It didn't get votes. It seemed difficult to tax. What was the good of it? Another ad hoc organization which might be capable of considerable extension of its functions is the Elder Brethren of the Trinity House, who control the lighthouses and charting of seas throughout the world. But it would need a very considerable revision and extension of Mr. Wolf's book, and in spite of the war stresses that have delayed and in some cases reversed their development, it would be quite beyond our present scope to bring up to date the lengthening tail of ad hoc international networks, ranging from international business cartels, scientific and technical organizations, white slave trade suppression, and international police cooperation, to health services and religious missions. Just as I have suggested, the United States and Great Britain may have become complete socialisms unawares, so it is not altogether impossible to dream that the world may discover it, to its great surprise, that it is already particularly a cosmopolis, through the extension and interweaving of these ad hoc cooperations. At any rate, we have this very powerful collateral process going on side by side with the more definite political schemes we have discussed. Surveying the possibilities of these various attacks upon the complicated and intricate obstacles that stand between us and a new and more hopeful world order, one realizes before the reasons for hope and that great possibility and the absurdity over overconfidence. We are all like soldiers upon a vast battlefield. We cannot be sure of the trend of things. We may be elated when disillusionment is rushing headlong upon us. We may be on the verge of despair, not knowing that our antagonists are already in collapse. My own reactions vary between an almost mystical faith in the ultimate triumph of human reason and goodwill and moods of stoic determination to carry on to the end in the face of what looks like inevitable disaster. There are quantitative factors in the outlook for which there are no data. There are elements of time and opportunity beyond any estimating. Every one of these activities we have been canvassing tends to delay the drift to destruction and provides a foothold for further counter-offensive against the adversary. In the companion predecessor to this book, The Fate of Homo Sapiens, I tried to drive home the fact that our own species has no more reason to believe it can escape defeat and extinction than any other organism that plays or has played its part in the drama of life. I have tried to make clear how precarious is our present situation and how urgent it is that we should make a strenuous effort of adjustment now. Only a little while ago, it seemed as though what was an appeal to a blind and deaf world invincibly set in its habitual ways into the question whether this inclination towards pessimism reflected a mood or phase in myself. And I threw out a qualifying suggestion or so. But for my own part, I cannot find any serious reason to believe that the mental efforts that was clearly necessary if man was to escape that fate that marched upon him would ever be made. His conservative resistances, his apathy seemed incurable. Now suddenly everywhere one meets with alarm and open and ended inquiring minds. So far, the tremendous dislocations of the present war have been immensely beneficial in stripping off what seemed to be quite invincible illusions of security only a year ago. I never expected to live to see the world with its eyes as widely open as they are today. The world has never been so awake. Little may come of it, much may come of it. We do not know. Life would amount to nothing at all if we did. All right, we're going to end right here, the world order and being. And now we shall check out the chat. Tricky Woo, Record Deepness, Hashima Wan, and Random Apple. Hello, everyone. Let's see. Random Apple. We do have one question. Hey, Todd, I know it's off topic, but do you think that voting is consistent with Christian nonviolence and separation from the world? Should I go vote before the poll closes? Well, I don't vote for precisely that reason. That's a little bit too much to get into right now. So, all right, everyone, make sure to tune in next week for the final reading of the New World Order and the fourth and final book of Technological Dictatorship series of 4 books. It's Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.